Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's session. My name is Josh Lipscomb. I'm the head of startup success at LaunchVic. And today we are here to talk about Basecamp, which is a new program from LaunchVic. Today I am dialing in from Wurundjeri country. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and waterways and pay respects to elders and Aboriginal folk joining us today, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Today, we're here to talk about Basecamp, which is an exciting new program from LaunchVic. This program has been developed to support founders at an early stage to hire their executive teams as they prepare to scale. At LaunchVic, we've seen what can go wrong when startups make the wrong hire, especially when you're hiring your senior leadership for the first time. The wrong hire can totally kill a company, and there's a lot of sunk costs that you probably can't afford at that early stage. There's a lot to get right when you're transitioning from a founder-led organization to setting up an executive team, and that's why we've developed Basecamp, to help prepare founders to get it right from the start. Basecamp is a 6-week program at no cost to Victorian founders. Through the program, we'll be focusing on the different functions of an executive team across HR, operations, finance, sales, and growth, and how getting these right from the start will help set you up to scale for success. Across the program, in each of the sessions, we'll be covering things like the role, what is a strategic version of the role, and what are the functional operations you need to consider, as well as the person. What does great look like when you're looking for this top talent for your startup? What do you need? What do the best need from you as the founder to help them succeed in their roles and scaling out their own teams? We'll also be looking at the match. What is the right model for you in terms of your organizational structure? How do you find the right people to match what you need as you prepare to scale and in the future? And what does the build look like when you're considering what are the relevant skills you need to build out the role for those new hires? And what else does that role and the function need from you as a leader to scale? In today's information session, we thought we'd invite 2 of the many mentors and facilitators of the program to share some of their experiences around hiring and how Basecamp will help founders plan to avoid those kind of problems. We'll chat about their experiences, and throughout today's session, we'll also talk about what will the program actually look like for you as a founder, and how can these people bring their experience and expertise to making sure that you know what you're doing when you're hiring out your first teams. So to start with, I would like to invite Puji Fernando, LaunchVic's very brand new COO, to the screen and introduce himself and his experience, and then we'll invite Lorena Healey as well up to the stage as well.
Hi, Josh. Thanks for the intro. My name's Puji, and as Josh mentioned, I'm the new COO of LaunchVic. I'm really excited to talk here today. Hopefully, I can bring a lot of experience. I've recently spent 5 years as the general manager of Australia for DoorDash, and that was a very, very wild and rapid journey. So looking forward to the discussion later on.
Thank you very much, Puji. And now I would like to invite Lorena Healey to the stage as our lead facilitator for the Basecamp program.
Thank you, Josh. Hello, everyone. So I'm Lorena and I run my own consulting practice. I've been doing that for 10 years now in organizational development. So I work with mostly startups and scale-ups to help them build out their people plans. So sometimes that's helping them articulate their purpose and vision, but more often than not, it's how you turn that into a strategy, how you turn that into operations, how you find the right people, how you develop them, retain them, etc. And before that, I was at SEEK for 8 years, which is, 25 years in startup land. And I worked with our HR representatives in the countries that we had stakes in and helped them build their teams, their people.
Excellent. So thank you very much. As I mentioned, today we're going to have a bit of a conversation between the 3 of us around those challenges and experiences when you're sort of setting up for success around your hiring strategies. We'll have time for some Q&A at the end. Please feel free to pop in any questions you have into the chat and we'll get to them when we do. And we'll also be going through some of the operational logistics of what the program looks like as well. So to kick things off, I'm going to start with you, actually, Puji, as you've recently joined the LaunchVic team from scaling DoorDash. When you first joined, there was only 15 people on the ground in the country. And I'm kind of curious to hear a bit of your experience of scaling that team. It was just as COVID was happening and you were hiring like crazy. What was that kind of like? What were like some of the challenges you had when you were trying to hire out a team so quickly?
Yeah, I mean, to paint the picture, there was a lot of uncertainty, and as a leader in the organization, honestly, like there was a lot that we were really nervous about. So what were we nervous about? We had a pretty fragile product. It worked in North America, but does it work for us? We had very immature processes, so we really didn't know what fail-safes look like from an operational perspective, and we were very, very resource and capital constrained. So it doesn't fill you with a lot of confidence, but at the same time, what made it even more, I guess, stressful was the incredibly huge goals that we had. Some of them were self-inflicted, some of them were directives from the board, but we had really, really big goals. I think often I get questions about how did you balance it all? And honestly, we really didn't. We knew that for us to capture an opportunity, we had a limited window to do all the things all at once. And it sounds like terrible advice for me to be saying that that's like a potential, pathway to take. But the thing we knew we had to do was we really had to get the right team in place straight away. Otherwise, there was just no way that this was going to work. So very early on, all of the senior manager hires we had were critical, and we needed to make sure that we had that right team in place straight away.
And from that kind of lens of, how identifying that you needed to make those senior hires quite quickly and all at the same time, how did you know how to prioritize in terms of what that process or what that order of hiring should look like? And did you get it right, or was it a bit of chaos kind of all mixed in there as well?
Oh, definitely chaos. I'll talk a little bit about the prioritization, and then I'll have an honest here's what worked and here's what didn't work. So the prioritization piece, the main thing that I would say is your hiring really needs to match your strategy. It cannot be an afterthought. It can't be something you do after you get approval on a strategy. Hiring really needs to be something that is hand in hand and intertwined with writing your strategy. So if you write your strategy, a good strategy should be able to step out. What are the capabilities you need on that journey? And then if you do that thinking up front, the hiring prioritization becomes a lot more obvious. Not entirely obvious, but it becomes a lot more obvious. The other thing I'll say is we didn't want to over-engineer the prioritization, because let's be real, the market doesn't know exactly what your prioritization is and waits for you to put your feeler out there. So you don't want to get too finicky with, well, what's our first and second hire? Maybe you look for both at the same time, and then you hope that you find the right people. So prioritization, it's all about matching the strategy. What worked for us was really stubbornly keeping that talent bar high. And this was really tough. But what we did practically is we pushed to really discover what a candidate's superpower is. You can't say 7 things. What are their 2 superpowers? And it should get you really excited. A question I used to really like asking is, this candidate, what are they better than me at? And if I couldn't answer that question really obviously, then no, that's not good enough. They need to be able to come in and be better than me at the key tasks that we need them to do. And essentially, you just need to see people pound the table for a hire. We used to have a panel of 4 or 5 people, and if they were, 4 yeses rather than no strong yeses, that's a no. You need to have people who are, yes, hell yes, we need this person. So those are, some of the things we did well early on.
That's interesting. And Lorena, I wonder, in your experience, because you've worked with so many different startups at various stages of scaling, is that identifying talent that is more experienced in you, is that something that you think founders are good at doing? And do you have some advice on how do you actually identify talent that is more experienced in you, and how do you, how do you help people who are more experienced at you coming into an organization and helping them succeed?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And it makes me smile when Puji says that, because I think that's the recipe for success. Someone said to me early in my career that every hire you make should move your team forward. You shouldn't just be replacing what you had, or, it's kind of like for like. It should be accelerating you. And that makes you have that mindset of, what is this person bringing into the team that we don't already have? But the reality of that is that's quite a humbling experience. You need to be able to park your ego. And, ego's not a bad thing. We all have it. And actually, you need it as a founder. You need the belief that what you're building and what you're doing is going to work. You need ego. But to be able to recognize that and say, for this instance, I actually need to build on what I bring, and I can't bring everything. I can't, even if I do know more than others in the room about this particular product, whatever it is we're doing, that's not scalable. I can't be in every conversation. I can't be making every decision. I need people who will be acting and thinking like me or better when I'm not in the room. So to answer your question, I mean, it's necessary, but do founders do it well? No, it's really hard. It's really hard. Sometimes you don't see it. You need other people in the hiring process to help you see it. So, Puji's example of having multiple people in a hiring decision, I think is really smart. It stops that confirmation bias. It stops, somebody hiring someone, which I see often, that they just really like. They really like them. They could get along with them. They'd have a beer with them. It's kind of the answer to the question that I asked early days when I was at SEEK, what makes somebody a great cultural fit here? And people would say, we could have a beer with them. And I think that's wonderful for you to build your friendship group, but it's not enough. So I think having multiple people in the hiring decision helps you bring that rigor in, and make sure you stay objective about what you're looking for. Does it really take you forward, or are you compromising?
No, I think that's really interesting. And throughout the Basecamp program as well, we will be talking about, or are teaching different ways of hiring, something that we hear a lot of the time from founders, especially founders who are first-time founders, or founders who may have a bit more of a technical background and are super focused on building out the product. They might not actually have experience either in HR in terms of managing, or what that hiring process should actually look like. And the best ways to do it, there are so many tools that are out there now that are sort of helping to try and remove bias or improve the hiring process. But Puji, from your experience in DoorDash, coming from an American kind of company landing in Australia, were their processes set up? Did the processes work for you from an Australian lens? What was that kind of process that you developed as you were hiring out the team in Australia?
Yeah, so this is such a great question. One I think I wish I thought more about. In hindsight, the processes that really helped us was, number one, was making sure that the hiring manager had the accountability throughout the whole process. It's not just something that they zoom in at the end of a process and do a closing call. They need to be involved in outreach and screening, the actual hiring, the debriefs, and very importantly, onboarding. Onboarding is something that I kind of got wrong in the past, not putting enough time into making sure that they hit the ground running, but putting a real process around the hiring manager. And more often than not, hiring managers will say, I don't have time for this. I've got big operations to run, or goals to hit. I deprioritize this, but you need to build a process around it so they cannot escape the accountability. So for everyone in this room, and for me in the past, the hiring manager is you. You need to put in the process to do it. The other thing that was really helpful from a process perspective is to have a hiring platform in place. That helps you with the structure. It helps everyone else be accountable, but it also allows you to go fast. A lot of times people hear structure and think slow, but when it comes to hiring, having a structure lets everyone get onto the same page really quickly, have really unbiased debriefs, etc. So the processes that allowed us to do to hire quickly is really to make sure the hiring manager is accountable, and having a platform that makes it easy and does some of that heavy lifting for you.
And throughout the program as well, we'll be bringing in a bunch of people that have used various different platforms, have advice around what works, what doesn't work. Sometimes at a really early stage versus that scaling stage, you do need to kind of work on the fly and develop things a little bit as they go as well. But Lorena, particularly, and we were chatting the other week about your sort of onboarding in those early days of SEEK and your experience. And I'm wondering if you could maybe share a little bit of what works and what doesn't work, and what particularly needs to happen when you're at those early stages around process, and what should onboarding look like?
Yeah, it's such an important, I think about onboarding as you've just invested all of this time in recruitment, and then you don't give as much energy to onboarding, you're letting yourself down. It's just the difference between somebody coming in early, kicking goals early, settling in, engaging the team, kind of everybody thinking we made the right hiring decision. The difference between that and somebody floundering and maybe stepping on toes and not knowing how to get things done can sometimes just be onboarding. So my experience at SEEK, pace is a wonderful thing, hiring at pace, but sometimes you overlook the basics, which is what day somebody is starting and what's going to happen. So when I first showed up at SEEK, I waited 45 minutes in reception. And I remember thinking at the time, this is an interesting experiment. I'm not sure what the intent is here, but the reality was HR thought sales were looking after me, sales thought HR was looking after me, and nobody was. So they rustled together a whole bunch of company swag and quickly created a calendar of events, and then came and got me from reception. But that was kind of the start of knowing they weren't ready for me. And you can kind of laugh at that stuff now, but there were kind of bigger implications to that. I was the first specialist role we'd hired in HR. Up until then, they'd been recruiters. So I'd go along to team meetings and kind of, not know what to contribute or how, because what I was working on was quite niche. And so I think when you're working that fast, when you're bringing in people that fast, to have a kind of, it doesn't have to be the Rolls Royce of an onboarding process, but a process that makes them feel like they're an insider as quickly as possible and they're no longer an outsider, requires some deliberate thought. What you do with them in the first day, the first week, what messages you send them, who they meet, even just grabbing them and saying, hey, do you want to go and grab a coffee? Those things just help them feel quickly at ease. But for more senior hires, even more critical. I think I've seen a client just recently actually have their first, I would call it their first senior executive hire, that's going to go from leading people to leading leaders. And their onboarding was abysmal. They knew the person was coming, they had their technology ready, and that's about it. So they hadn't given any thought to what meetings they should be in, even how to bring the teams together, even the framing for their peers on the way that role would interact with theirs. So you're already behind the eight ball, I think, trying to play catch up. And I think there's some very simple, pragmatic tools we can share in the program that will make onboarding a lot simpler.
Yeah, and I think one of those things that you just mentioned as well that we really want to kind of focus on through this program, so, sometimes if you make the right hire at the right time or the wrong hire at the wrong time, or there's a lot of management, sometimes you need to work around bringing someone in a more senior level into a team that might already exist. And one of the things we do want to focus on in this program is very much a lot of the time in early stage startups, it's very easy to hire a friend or a friend of friend or someone that you already know from your sort of network. And early days, that's kind of great because you can put a lot of trust in this person. But as you're scaling, sometimes you need someone with a more senior experience or more executive kind of scale up experience on how to, like you mentioned, how to lead a team or lead a team of leaders. And so I'm wondering, in your experience, either Puji or Lorena, how can we help founders bring in someone, and how do you have those conversations with a team that, they might be an operations manager that you're kind of expecting to, they might be expecting to be the next COO of the company. How can we help people? How will the program help people have those kind of conversations with someone at that more junior stage while they're bringing in someone to kind of take on that role and take that team further?
Yeah. Oh, well, we've talked about this as part of the program content, which I think is really important. Is this is all great in theory, in knowing when to build, within the talent and when to buy the talent, but there's also a bit of a healthy dose of pragmatism that we need to help people with, which is you're going to have some tricky conversations along the way. there will come a time in any growing, scaling business where you bring in talent, and it's a natural human reaction for those that were there to say, well, I would have liked to put my hand up for that role, or I thought that's where I was heading. There's also opportunities where you wrestle with, is it the right thing to develop people internally, or do we go externally? And we do really want to help people work through those decisions, because there is no blueprint for it. There's no right or wrong. My experience at SEEK, we did try to go internally in every case unless we couldn't, and then we would go externally. And it's great to grow at scale. It's great to give people opportunities for development. There's lots of positives with that, but there are certain roles that you just cannot compromise on. And by going internally and you're developing people into those roles, you might be missing the best that's out there with perspective, with experience. So we really want to help people recognize when those conversations are necessary, but then have them, because when you don't have them, I think that's when you breed resentment, distrust. You start seeing pop up in things like engagement surveys, in exit interviews, etc., that I thought I was due for that opportunity, I didn't get it. And I think there is a way for us to be able to help people build their career, but be honest with them about the reality of that, and when's the point in time we need to inject the team with more.
Yeah, and that kind of relates to a question that's kind of come through as well, which I might throw either of you, maybe Puji, you might have some good insight to this. But like, how at those early stages, how do you attract like top talent? How did you attract top talent as yours kind of, DoorDash was new to Australia in a very competitive market at the time as well? How were you appealing to that kind of top, like that experienced talent?
It's such a good question, because we underestimated the need to do the sell as a business. So we kind of assumed everyone knew what DoorDash was doing in other geographies and thought everyone, hey, they're going to be happy to work here. But actually, top talent actually needed a little bit of convincing and needed a little bit of information. So we actually underestimated the sell. And so we actually spent a lot of time really trying to lay out what is the employee proposition for working at DoorDash. I mean, in 2020, no one knew what DoorDash was. So we really had to educate about the vision, about the role, the impact that they could have. And a really useful exercise was actually saying, well, what is our proposition compared to going and joining a Big Four bank or another business? And so just like we think about our product, we had to think about, well, hey, we actually need to sell the role, and let's not just wait until the end to close a candidate. Sometimes we needed to think about doing the close really early on to even get them to consider us as a business. So sometimes when you're not the kind of household brand, that's a really tough thing you need to do and invest a lot of time thinking about. So how do we attract the talent? We put in the effort up front to sell it to them. We didn't just assume that they would think that this is their next dream place to work.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting, because it kind of comes back to one of the first things we sort of started talking about this morning as well, around that strategy piece. And we really want to focus. We'll be kicking off the program. Every founder thinks they know what their strategy is, and they often do, and it's all in their head. And when you're trying to sell to new people who, like you mentioned, might not know you as a household name, or you might think that you know how to communicate your strategy, but a lot of times there's a lot of things you kind of forget, or you get confused about, or you don't quite communicate it in the way that you think you're communicating it. And Lorena, I think we've been having these conversations from a sort of program design perspective of Basecamp and the importance of getting it right. I guess I'm wondering, could you share a little bit how we kind of plan on kicking off the program and focusing on that strategy, and how we're going to be relating everything that we talk about in the program back to this like very crucial piece that you need to get right?
Yeah, it is the anchor. I think it's exactly what Puji said early in, when you're first introducing yourself, Puji, about if you know where you're going. It's that I mean, who was it? Somebody like Gandhi, somebody far more impressive than Lorena Healey, said, if you know your why, you can deal with any what. You have to be able to say what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think, just back on your point about selling yourself, that I work with a startup who, what they do is quite complex, and they're very good at explaining it, but it is to somebody who, you know, lives and breathes the tech world, I still don't understand what they do, and I've been working with them for 2 years. So they have to get very crisp at why. Like, who benefits from it? Why do we do what we do? Why are we doing this versus coming in and doing something else every day? And that is an attraction tool for them. But to answer your question about strategy, yeah, it's sort of the anchor about what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we think we're going to get there, and what capabilities we need to succeed. All of those things are necessary ingredients to begin hiring people. Without that, you might, I mean, even in my time at SEEK, it was pretty established by the time I joined, 150 people just listed on the stock exchange. They weren't, you know, wasn't a startup, it was scaling by that point. But being able to articulate, we need this mindset, and in 6 months' time, we're going to need the person. And customer experience is a really good example of that, or user experience is a good example of that. We need to think like our users, and now we need a team. Those are two different things. So you're knowing what your strategy is asking you to deliver this year is necessary to determine that kind of phasing. It's why we start the program with that. So it takes it out of the founder's head and into something that then you can start building a, you know, hiring plan off.
Yeah, that makes, for us who are in the process of designing the program, it makes a lot of sense. Hopefully that's resonating with some people that are on the call today or tuning in later. I feel like we could have a conversation that lasts days and days and days about all of this and all of the things that go right and go wrong. But we are limited for time this morning. So I'm going to open up for any questions that anybody on the call has. There is a couple that have already started coming through, but I might just do a quick recap of kind of what the program is going to look like and a bit of overview. And then we'll kind of, like, as the questions start coming through, get to those as we go. But so Basecamp, it's a very brand new program from LaunchVic. It is free for Victorian founders and exclusive to Victorian founders. Thank you to the Victorian government. The program is run over 6 sessions, over 7 weeks. So we do have a break week in the middle. Throughout the program, we'll be focusing on developing your strategy and helping you pitch your strategy to top talent. It's focused on the functions that will be focused on from this very early stage of scaling. Going to be focused on HR, operations, finance, sales, and growth, and how these kind of roles need to fit into your strategic plan, but also your strategic hiring roadmap, helping you identify what roles you need to be focused on and focus on building out as you start to scale. As Lorena just mentioned as well, making sure that it relates back to your strategy and can help you really understand what you need to do when you're building out your team. In terms of companies that we're looking for that are for eligibility from this program, companies that have either somewhere between that seed to Series A stage, you might have just raised a Series A round, you might be looking to over the next 6 to 12 months, companies who have a minimum team of 10 or 10, between 10 to 50 kind of like team, looking to really bring in that senior leadership team to help scale your company. A revenue of at least AU 100K per month. You might have successfully graduated from an accelerator, or you have a valuation greater than 5 million, but no more than 30 million AUD. That's kind of a bit of the operational kind of side of what the program is and the kind of companies that we're looking to help scale. And so on to some of the questions that are coming through the Q&A. And please feel free to pop any questions that you do have into the chat, and we'll get to them as we get to. But a question here from Chris is, on the flip side of finding the right person, how do you assess your organizational readiness for these kind of hires as well? Again, it's something that we will kind of be touching on through the program, but Lorena, would you?
Yes, we will touch on it. It's kind of the money shot question, because it is often people don't do this and then they realize, you know, they weren't. And we've shared examples of this before, but I've worked with a founder who hired their first big role, a COO, with the intent that the founder would eventually step away further from the operations, and they weren't ready for it. And they were left in this awful world afterwards of not knowing whether it was the role, the person, them, you know, what is it? And I think it comes to org readiness. So some of the things that Chris mentioned there in the brackets, I think are critical, but some really simple things I think we can do when we're thinking about whether we're ready for the role is being able to answer the question of what problem you're solving by hiring that role. And then looking at, does anybody do any of that function today? And almost treating it like a bit of a change management exercise. What's going to need to shift for this to be owned by one person? How's it going to impact those other roles? The kind of Venn diagram of the roles that intersect, and then also where they don't, the things that fall through the gaps today. Will that be this person's responsibility? What decision-making rights do you want them to have? What does it require the founder to shift on? And the questions I like to ask when you get to this, detail with the founder is, how will you handle when that first, operational decision comes up? What role will you play? What role do you want them to play? And I think it's easier to, it's great in theory, but when you're asking them, when you're in a town hall and this topic comes up, are you speaking or are they speaking? Those sorts of things I think can at least help you see whether they're jarring with that question and that's an uncomfortable place, or they've started to think about it. So org readiness is just really practical. It's the shift from, we've got the PD, in theory we think we need this person too, but how are you going to make it work? What are all the sticking points that could make this person fail?
Yeah, and I think throughout the program as well, we want to make sure this program is like really useful and practical, and we want to make sure people are leaving the program with tools and resources that they can put into practice in their hiring strategies today, tomorrow, the next 12 months, and into the future as well. And this is kind of getting to a question that's come through from David in terms of pitching to people and salary, but not only salary, but how can we help founders create the role and the function and understand where they need to be sort of stepping back from that role. And so this person coming in as the new COO or CFO is empowered to kind of take those questions in those town halls and take on that responsibility. How can we help? Well, I guess like one of the things we want to do is help founders understand that, but how do you think we might be able to help them do that throughout the program and from a logistical kind of learning experience?
Do you want me to jump in? Because I have thoughts, but then Puji, you probably have thoughts too.
Yeah, I mean, I think David's question was about, well, what happens if the dollars don't stack up to market or expectations? And so what I've done in the past is you try to problem solve with them and simulate what their role will actually be like. You don't want to just convince them, and then on day one, it's not what you were convincing them about, because they'll walk. But what you want to do is expose them to, what you're excited for them to bring to the role. And often it would be meeting up with someone and a blank piece of paper. Here's the problem I'm working on, and show them your kind of vulnerability about, hey, it's not, I can't solve this. This is why we need you. Let's talk about it. By problem solving with them, they kind of get hooked on the idea. And so then that's one way for it not to be just about the dollars. Another thing that I tried to do is expose the candidate to the rest of the team as well, because that's got to be something that they feel is a match. And so if it's not about the dollars, but hey, they're working on really big problems and the people I'll be working with are a fantastic team, now that's a pretty compelling reason for, okay, well, I'm going to take a little bit of a hit on remuneration for a little bit because of what we can do at that business. So those are two things that I did in the early days when, maybe REM wasn't as competitive as I would have liked.
Yeah, and I think too, there's a maybe it's a naive point of view, but I think if you start only competing on REM, it's difficult to shift that dial over time. It becomes the lever. And I think knowing what makes you really unique. When I worked at SEEK, we were really challenged by a consultant that came in and helped us do some employee value proposition work and was saying, what makes you unique? And we were saying a whole bunch of things that we were using to sell to candidates. And the consultant was saying, but wouldn't every tech company your size say that? And you're like, yeah, we can no longer compete on our table tennis table or our slide or whatever it is. It's not the thing. What is the thing that's going to attract the right people? And so part of that is a, commensurate salary package. But the other part is what is it that's unique about this place? You won't get it anywhere else. Maybe it's the work. And if it's the work, I think that's the best lever to pull, because it's what you really want your employees motivated by is doing bloody brilliant work. So yeah, it's a tricky one to navigate, but there are ways to go about it that doesn't just make it about the dollars.
Yeah. And in terms of helping founders navigate that process and what that should kind of look like as well, from a practical kind of sense throughout the program, we'll be bringing in mentors who are founders who have scaled this entire experience through all the way through to unicorn valuation, $1 billion valuation, as well as people who are living and breathing these roles day in, day out. So CFOs, COOs, CPOs, who are 2 or 3 steps ahead of where you are now as a founder, as you're preparing to scale. Like, what were the roles like when they kind of entered these early stage tech companies, through to where are they at now, and how did they go about managing that experience themselves and managing those roles and their teams with their founders as well, and helping them also empower their founders to make the right decisions as well. It's going to be a whole raft of various people with various experiences coming into the program to help you really understand and unpack what it is you're doing and how to help scale. But an interesting question that's just come through in terms of these functional roles and those early stages, and kind of comes back to that question around salary and remuneration. Like, we'll also be unpacking, like, what does it look like when you're trying at that early stage to convince someone in from a fractional role kind of perspective as well. Like, and people have various experiences and a lot of opinions, but to give Lewis a bit of a thought, I know that Lewis is very early stage, having just graduated from the Ant Health program, another program funded by LaunchVic. What are like some of our thoughts or advice around that in these early stages?
Lorena, this is a good question for you. I haven't had a ton of success with it early on, so I think I've got a lot to learn on that side too. But it's not something that I reached for many times.
I think it comes back to what your strategy is asking of you, and knowing, is that going to solve the problem? And if there's a partway bet, half, each way bet, I think was the expression I was looking for. You're just not sure, and you're kind of throwing caution to the wind and saying, we're going to try this, but we're not sure. I mean, going back to my recruitment days 50 years ago, we were experimenting with job share. And this was back in the time when job share was unheard of. Part-time work was still kind of revolutionary, that we were experimenting with a service where we would go in and hire candidates, not one candidate, but you get 2, and we set up a job share arrangement. And we didn't know if it would work. We had no proof of concept other than what we thought the world was doing, and that we could perhaps accelerate some of that flexibility. So we called it that, and we called it an experiment, with, obviously full knowledge of the candidate that occupied the role, calling them an experiment. But we set up their salary package for that as well. So there was a standard REM base salary, but there were bonuses attached to what we could deliver and how quickly we could deliver it. So they went in with full knowledge, knowing that we are trying this. We don't know if it's going to work. It was easy to do because nobody else was affected. It could stand on its own. And if we proved concept, other parts of the business would introduce that person into their world. So I think it can work where you can isolate it. You can almost treat it like an incubator. Where it gets tricky, I think, and you're not sure if they're going to be, it's going to be the right role for you in the long term, is where you don't treat it. You're not open about that. You bring in the function, you bring in the role, you bring in the person, it doesn't work, then it looks like a failure. And, we're all very open to that. We all say that, failure is growth and all the rest of it. But the reality is, when you have recruitment hiring decisions, people do brand those as failures. They get a bit nervous about making the next one and all the rest of it. So I think being really open with it and calling it what it is, and making sure that what would you determine a waste of time? What would a waste of time look like? How do we avoid that? How do we put some metrics around it to know a month in, we know it's going in the right direction. You know, by the second month, we want to see X, Y, Z, or we pull it back.
And the only thing I'll add to that, and I know we're close to time, is why will fractional work? Why is that so appealing? Is it expertise? And I think what some of my mistakes in the past have been thinking or overemphasizing experience. And what I do now is I compromise on experience for kind of potential and slope now. So if you're hiring, if fractional is an option because you think it's the experience, then maybe challenge your own mindset to think, well, is talent or potential going to be better here at 100? So that's probably where I would really push back. And if you go through that question and there's a good reasons for it, yeah, like Lorena said, there's ways to set that up from the outset. But that's probably where I'd push on that decision.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, and I think there's just a question here as well. And we actually are almost out for time. But one of the questions that's come through is understanding the reasons why people leave the role. And a lot of that does come back to making sure that you do have the right processes set up, the right onboarding experience, the right plan and strategy for them to kind of understand where they need it, what they need to be doing and what they need to be hitting for helping them, preparing them to set up to succeed. But we will be, throughout the program, be talking about onboarding, offboarding, experience in bringing people into the team and helping to set them up to succeed. And this also goes back to a question that's just come through from Jamie around what are the roles that companies need to be looking at to hire early to support the founder. And again, that will be very much coming back to setting up for success, understanding how to communicate your strategy, understanding what that strategic hiring process and roadmap needs to look like for you as you begin to scale out your team. But we do have just a couple of very quick minutes left if anybody does have any other questions. But in the meantime,
just a very quick answer to Tiang's question about really the reasons people leave the role. One simple question I ask people is, finish this sentence. I would never have left if. Just go wherever you want to go with it. But, what is that going to be? And sometimes I do a full exit interview. They've told me all the things that, were great about the opportunity they're going to. They weren't looking. And then you ask them that question and they say, if, I was treated with respect, or something like a mic drop moment. You go, well, okay, that's the actual real reason you're leaving. So it could be a simple one.
Yeah. And I think that's a very important place to leave this session. Just to recap, Basecamp is a new program for Victorian founders, where we're going to help founders understand how to hire and empower their senior and executive teams. Expressions of interest are currently open and they close on the 24th of February. The link is, I think, either attached to this post. It's on our website at launchvic.org. If you do have any questions, please email us at programs@launchvic.org. And we look forward to receiving your expressions of interest for this very exciting new program. Thank you very much to Puji, and thank you to Lorena, and thank you to everybody who has joined us today. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.